Welcome to En Blanc et Noir. This video is about double counterpoint and imitation. At first there will be some analysis, and after that I want to show how Partimento bases exploit double counterpoint procedures. In the last part of the video there will be some very short examples that will help to improve improvisational skills. I hope I can show you something that you don't already know. Instead of showing you charts with inverted intervals, I want to show two short opening sections that are based on the same simple interval skeleton composed by two rate A major league composers. The first one is a typical example for a two-voice Invencio type keyboard piece. It is the beginning of a movement from a suite in G minor by George Frideric. The imitative structure consists of two motivic elements, a soggetto in 16th notes plus a rhythmically contrasting counterpoint in 8th notes that appear one after another in both voices. Due to the arrangements of two building blocks, I call this a cross imitation. A closer look at the melodic scaffolding reveals a quite common melodic motion that consists of a stepwise ascent from the first to the third degree. The counterpoint that Handel applies is as basic as it can be, a clausular cantizans, 1-7-1. Handel's example obviously proves that both melodic modules can be exchanged and still create a flawless counterpoint. So let's put the diminutions aside to get a clearer concept on the events taking place on the deep layer. Here's the skeleton that I consider as its contrapuntal core. The melodic modules 1-3 and 1-7-1 are like Siamese twins that belong together, can be exchanged, and always will reveal a correct and smooth counterpoint that's based on imperfect intervals. The left version is based on the interval of the sixth. The exchanged version on the right is based on a counterpoint by thirds. Let's have a quick look at another opening example to prove what I just explained. Though the foreground layer and character of the piece is very different, we find the same skeleton and inversion type when looking at the main beat of every bar, the ascending line from 1-3, and the cantizans as fitting counterpoint. Even though the aspect of imitation is missing here, Sebastian jumps right into double counterpoint procedures as he presents both soggettos as a contrapuntal unity from bar 1-3 and shows the voice exchange right away in the following three bars. For an 18th century composer, harmony and counterpoint were not divided disciplines. It was much more like a bifocal view at the same object and way more integrative than modern theory suggests. Hence, when dealing with 18th century music, it is in most situations good to talk about implied harmonic or implied contrapuntal aspects, because they belong together and should not be separated without necessity. Let me put this completely clear. The discussed two-part skeleton is nothing else than a prevalent outer voice motion of two important rule of the octave segments, or, from the contrapuntal perspective, a prevalent harmonic filling of an important smooth two-voice scaffolding. This could be, for example, a three-part structure, and in 4 parts as well. Before we go to Partimento, we should have a look at another example by George Frideric from the same G minor suite, because it features an important additional aspect. Though the diminution is clearly based on chordal structures, the two-part skeleton is still the underlying scaffolding. The reduction shows the twin pair but with a syncopation applied, producing a dissonance. The Argans voice produces the dissonance through movement, while the syncopated partients needs to be resolved by stepwise descent. Whether the syncopation lies in the bass or in the upper voice, the suspension is a 2-3 or a 7-6 suspension. I think the terms Argans and partients are by the 16th century theorist and Monteverdi opponent Artusi. They are very useful and should be applied in situations like this one. I borrow the first example from a chapter of Giorgio Sanguinetti's Art of Partimento, where he explains different double counterpoint patterns. The bassline and figures are by Nicola Fago, who trained Niccolo Gemelli, Leonardo Leo, and Nicola Sala. So he was the teacher of 3 most prominent Neapolitan composers, of which Leo and Sala became important teachers themselves. When scanning the bassline, you'll notice immediately that the rhythmic activity of the beginning doesn't maintain throughout the whole section. The stylistic norms of the Baroque era prescribe an ongoing rhythmic pulse in at least one of the voices, so if one voice is inactive, the others should at least work. I call this principle complementary rhythmics. With respect to this consideration, it's obvious that Mr. Fago's bassline requires a right-hand realization that fills out the gaps where the bass has longer values. Besides that, the examination of the bassline reveals familiar structures. The beginning is a diminution of the stepwise ascent, directly followed by a clausular cantizans. I think this indicates at least 2 possible realizations. The first one is just a simple imitation at the octave, so I apply the soggetto to the right hand, which fits exactly Fago's figuration, as he apparently is sketching the required complementary skeleton. The second one is some sort of cross-imitation, as C and G sharp fit perfectly. This is probably the realization Fago had in mind, because he is indicating the G sharp already above the B. The section as a whole shows a common succession of compound building blocks. The initial phase is followed by a sequence that leads to an attached cadence confirming the key of A minor. I would realize it in a very basic 2-part structure in the manner of a jig. Hey folks, if someone of you watching that video by any chance knows where I can get the whole bassline, please leave a comment. I would be very happy about it. It doesn't have to be an edited PDF file, link to a source manuscript is completely fine. Thanks. This Fenaroli is like every other bass from his 4th book, unfigured, and the student is forced to work out the implied procedures on his own terms. When scanning the bass, I recognize a succession of 2 different building blocks from bar 1 to 4, and their reoccurrence in the dominant key in the following bars. However, it's not exactly the same. This bassline is quite similar constructed as the last example by Handel. So we should follow the procedure of the original example and just cross the given soggetti at the octave and stick to that as well when the key changes. I added a little adjustment to the syncopated soggetto because I wanted to have the third instead of the octave. As a soft rule, I'd say a smooth counterpoint will in most cases include imperfect consonances when possible. Let's give it a listen. I think this procedure was a bit unsophisticated and I should throw in some further necessary explanations. One very important aspect of multiple counterpoint is the combination of clausulae, because most of the combinations produce a prefixed, approved, and what's most important, invertible counterpoint. As you can see, Fenaroli combines a cantizans with a bassizans, or when you do it like me, preferring the third, an altizans. If you don't have a bloody clue what I'm talking about, go to the Early Music Sources YouTube channel and check out the video about cadences. And there is still more to know. In Fenaroli's Regole, you can find a paragraph called Delle legature del basso, concerning suspensions of the bass. Among the musical examples, there's one that is quite illuminating for our purposes. The trio setting shows a dissonant 2-4 figuration above the tight note resolving into a consonant 6th chord. From this point of view, Fenaroli's diminution appears to be a dissolution of the two upper voices into a single one that shows a constant pulse of quarter notes. This kind of soggetto seems to be very popular, as you can find it frequently in compositions and different collections of partimenti as well. For example, here's the beginning of a partimento by Giacomo Insanguine that looks almost the same. I think he also aims for a cross combination of the given soggetti, and there's as well a modulation heading at the dominant with a reoccurrence of the soggetto pair. A realization could sound like this. For a deeper understanding of the schemata and their potential for diminution, I would copy and examine the following examples, which are all based on one of the discussed scaffoldings. And what's most important, don't forget to transpose. One could start with a plain scaffolding in both possible constellations. First, the one on the left. And now the inverted version on the right side. A very basic diminution of this scaffolding could look like this. Here is again an example by Insanguine. I recommend to study this partimento as a whole anyway, because everything is very clear. The solution of the beginning should be an easy task now. This example is by the Italian composer Giovanni Battista Pescetti. In the original, the bassline of bar 1 and 2 is omitted. I added it to show that this example is just like the others, based on the invertible schema. The soggetto in eighth notes is taken from a courante by Handel. I decided to apply a new counterpoint that fits my pedagogical purposes better. Final example. I borrowed this soggetto from a most famous sonata by Domenico Scarlatti. next step would be to build up a whole musical sentence, which means adding a sequential episode followed by a cadence. Here is a proposal. I just keep it very simple by adding a faux-bourdon as a sequential episode and attach a 3-4-5-1 cadence. This is what it sounds like. For further practice, I recommend to improvise and write down different phrases like this one in different keys, different meters, and different diminutions, beginning with an imitative section. So that's it for today. What I wanted to show is that improvisation is not primarily about being original. It is learnable, and a good deal of it is to assemble a stock of combinable building blocks. I hope we'll see each other again in one of the next videos, because there's always more to learn.